close. So is the mayor on and or Councillor Norton?
Sorry, my camera and mic were off. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just hitting the people list. All right. Let's get going. So officially 4:31, I will call this meeting of the St. John Council Finance Committee to order and start with item 2.1, which is the minutes of November 21st. I'll ask for a motion. Thank you, Councillor Hickey and your worship. All in favor of approving the minutes? Any opposed? Carried. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. Your worship, moving it. Thank you, Councillor Radwin, for second. All in favor signify raising your hand. Contrary minded? Carried. Item number 4, disclosures of conflict of interest, if any. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5, which is the consent agenda. Any questions or comments on items 5, 1, 2, or 3?
I'll move 5.1 to 5.3.
Okay, moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hickey. Just a couple of quick comments, I guess, from me, if nobody else has them. First, thank you, 5.1 and 5.2. I already sent out through my social media channels. Director Forgy, director, I think. Thank you very much for putting those together. It's such an easy, it makes it so much easier for us to communicate where people's money is going, and having them get that out. And just a note on 5.3, the capital reserve recommendation. Thank you. I know I've asked about that in council, and just nice that we've got set out, you know, what kind of smart forward thinking things are we doing right now to kind of ride the wave of inflation this year to keep things under control. So thanks for that. Councillor Radwin, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was quite intrigued with these infographics too, and I thought it was just kind of interesting to look and see that our number one priority is growth, but we're only spending about 10% on that, which is around $18 million. It's not a drop in the bucket, but still we're spending money there, while we're spending 34% of the budget on public safety, which makes up about almost $60 million out of a $177 million budget. You know, it's just really interesting to see really where all of the dollars and cents go in your household as well. So, you know, I hope I want to share that out to my social media people as well, because I think it's really interesting, kind of sets it all up to think, okay, this is how much of my tax dollars are going to each area the city spends. So anyway, and I did want to make a comment that it's kind of sad to see that we're having to dip into reserves, and you know, it's unfortunate, but of course there has been a lot of inflation. So, you know, and of course with interest rates going up, and you know, CPI is up so much that I have a lot of concerns, and I hope that that we're not going to have to dip into it again. So fingers crossed. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Thank you for those comments. I conversations I've had with our CFO, this is one of the reasons we have our reserves is, you know, nobody predicted 2 years ago this kind of rampant inflation. But I also think it's very smart, talked about it in the report. It's not unlimited. You know, what's a smart, maybe up to 25% of the reserves if needed in order to keep projects going. But beyond that, there are some projects that we are prepared to defer if needed, in order to not have to dip into the reserves further. So again, really smartly thought out and planned out. So thanks for that. And yeah, your questions are right on. If there are no other questions, we've had it move, the consent agenda moved and seconded. I will take a vote on the consent agenda. All in favor, aye, or raise your hands. Contrary minded, and carried, which brings us to item 6.1, the strategic procurement policy update, which includes some well-researched starting into social procurement. So looking forward to hearing that. CFO Fudge, if you would take it away, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan and Finance Committee members. We couldn't be more pleased to be before you this afternoon with another major milestone in our efforts to modernize the strategic procurement policy for the City of St. John. Common Council has identified this policy, just for a refresher, as being a priority in the CAO's approved 2023 work plans, where we are making great progress. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge our team. This is a joint initiative between the Finance Department and General Counsel, and the project is co-sponsored by myself as well as the city's General Counsel, Melanie Tompkins. However, the heavy lifting on this project, I would say months of work, months of research, was as a result of several talented individuals who are in attendance this afternoon. I'd just like to acknowledge them before we get started here. First of all, Jody Forgey, you mentioned her earlier, Mr. Chair. She's our Director of Finance. She oversees at a director level our Strategic Procurement Department. Next up to bat, we've got Chris Roberts. He's our city's procurement manager. Chris has 20 years of experience with the city, leading the city in all matters procurement. He's our internal subject matter expert and our guru, and he lends a tremendous amount of value and experience to this project. We also have Orlando Lineros. He's in the General Counsel's office. He's an important member of our team. He ensures that the policy complies with laws, regulations, constant review of our trade treaties to make sure we're on side. And in the presentation, Jody will go through with you. She will speak to two very seasoned procurement experts that we've engaged for this project. First and foremost, Paul Manueli. He's the General Counsel and Managing Director of the Procurement Office. He is internationally known as an author and a procurement lawyer with over 20 years of experience in public procurement. He's recognized as one of the top 10 public procurement lawyers in the world and by the courts as an expert in procurement, public procurement practices. We've also engaged Larry Berglund, who has supported the city on understanding opportunities with respect to social procurement. Larry was fundamental to implementing the first ethical and sustainable procurement policy in Canada. So before you in your packet is a draft strategic procurement policy, which will be presented as a receive and file this afternoon. We still have work to do and work to conduct before we can be in a position to bring this back as a final recommendation, and Jody will go through that in her one of her slides. So I'm excited to have Ms. Forgey provide the presentation to the committee. The presentation will address several recommendations in the Ernst & Young operational audit, as well as provide new policy guidance that will allow the city to pilot social procurement to potentially achieve best procurement value for the taxpayer, as well as she will highlight next policy steps with respect to supplier performance and contract management. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Ms. Forgey, who will provide you an overview of the policy and discuss next steps. Thank you.
All right, thank you, CFO Fudge. That was a great introduction, and thanks, Chair Sullivan and Finance Committee for your excitement on this as well. We're very excited. We've been working on it for months now and can't wait to hope to roll this out in June. So you now have a draft policy for your review. So the agenda today will be to go through the key areas of change, the exciting implementation of social procurement, and the timelines. Procurement for the city is guided by key regulations, which we must uphold and ensure we are following. This is fundamental to the day-to-day operations and processes embedded within the procurement team and the direction given to the entire staff when we procure. Our procurement team, as Kevin mentioned, 20 years plus experience, dedicates their time throughout the year to obtain the required updates to their designations and to ensure they have the most recent changes to the regulation. In order to keep our policy relevant in relation to these regulations, we are at times referencing it in the policy, but moving forward, we don't give the very specifics of the regulation. This was a really important change for us because it allows us to be more quick in adjusting to the changes. So instead of putting the very specific details, if the regulation is updated, we're always referencing to the regulation. The policy is now truly meant to be the high-level document, while we have a procurement procedures manual that will be used day to day by the city. This manual is fluid and will be regularly updated and communicated to staff. The importance of having this manual are to provide clear direction and consistent procedures and processes that are in accordance with our policy. So I apologize right now. Some of the information you've heard before from me, but I'll try to be really quick on that stuff and just introduce the new items and the changes since last time. The first area of policy update is in our procurement methods. The current procurement methods described within our policy are the items you can see there in the blue highlighted column. As you can see, when you look to the right, the regulations are much higher. So we've been using a conservative threshold when we go open competitive bid. So the policy will be changing to update for those adjustments as well. So section 6 of our newly drafted policy outlines the changes we have made. Most notably is that we have not restricted ourselves in procurement planning where we are not required to do so legally. This means that any dollar amount above the thresholds listed in the previous slide will be dictated by the applicable laws. And then anything below will be procured with the assistance and support of the supply chain management team for above $15,000. The ultimate goal we have is to be fair and transparent in our practices, and this goal hasn't changed. Similar to what we read in other policies, this will allow the city to incur costs that balance with the benefit received and to not overburden unnecessarily in relation to the procurement method and to pivot our attention to being more strategic. By reducing the red tape, it will aid us in accelerating the procurement cycle for acquisitions, resulting in a more nimble and responsive organization. And surprisingly enough, when you use open advertised competitive bidding, it can actually introduce a level of risk to the organization. And why would we take that risk on if we're not required to do so? So spending and signing authorities was an item we had previously discussed and was brought forward by the EMY operational audit. So the current spending authorities are again conservative in comparison to total dollar spend and what other municipalities have implemented. By increasing our spending authorities while maintaining appropriate controls to manage risk, it will allow us to have better turnaround times by allowing the organization to operate within their approved budgets. This will help us not have to prepare and wait for council meetings. In our previous presentations, and I won't bring it up again, we have provided the comparisons among municipalities, and we were to return with our final recommendation to you on the appropriate amounts. If you recall, in our initial recommendation, we were just moving the CAO and commissioners up. But after careful consideration and review of our controls, we've decided to move everybody up. So this will really help us with our procurement and being much more quicker, will be more strategic. And interesting enough, and I do want to repeat this one point, when we looked at the stats of our in the last presentation, we saw that 92% of our spend was approved by council, and 60% was for 14 projects over $1 million. When we move to this, we'll have like 30 reports versus 103 reports going to council. So it's a big change, and it actually showed that we're seeing 71% of the cost still going to council. As you remember in the EMY report, they discussed the award and signing piece as well. We have made significant changes to the policy to provide delegation of authority to the CAO, commissioners, and directors. But why was this so important? There are 3 areas that this change will contribute to. which was the red tape reduction, mitigation of risk, and strategic. We have already talked about the red tape reduction in our previous presentation. However, some even more insightful observations were made upon our discussions with other municipalities and moving in this direction and from our legal counsel. When Common Council is involved in the administrative process of awarding contracts, there is a perceived political influence. In addition, we learned this will also contribute to our focus of having more strategic practices when there are delays in decisions and awarding of contracts. It impacts the potential suppliers who will bid. It could even impact the price. So another interesting part, and this is very specific to New Brunswick, was the way the LGA is written. So there are two pieces that need to be included in the recommendation for contracts, and Orlando helped us with this. So first, we've added the wording to all the CAO, commissioners, and directors to award contracts up to their spending authority. So if you recall, that was the table I showed earlier. Keeping in mind that the contracts will still go through all the significant steps of review by procurement and general counsel. The only step removed was the final step where they submitted it to Common Council for approval. The second piece, which will have to be adjusted, is that General Counsel, through a bylaw, will authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the contract, which was approved by either the CAO, commissioner, or director. Essentially, they can sign the contract without taking it to Common Council. In addition, as you will see in our reporting section, we have added in the reporting annually of all purchases greater than 100,000, so that Common Council will have a list of awards that have been given over this dollar amount for review and information purposes. So we can see now, especially in the marketplace, is the right time to move forward with an annual procurement plan. The intention of this plan is not to create more work, but to provide a proactive approach for the year on purchases. This will allow the procurement team to have holistic procurements for the year and an understanding of what is to come. This will inform the procurement team and provide them with more tools to support the organization. And the idea of the annual procurement plan is they'll work with the service areas after the budgets are approved. Ethical conduct and conflicts of interest is very, very important to the city. The city expects everyone to act with integrity and conduct business in an ethical manner. This information will assist in guiding staff, suppliers, Common Council, and anyone else doing business with the city. The supplier code of conduct will be provided to suppliers to inform them of our expectations. So, winning the work is one thing, but how well did you perform? So we're implementing supplier performance management initiatives, and this is fairly new to the city, and it's going to be formal methods to evaluate suppliers on the goods, service, and construction. There is the opportunity or potential for suppliers to be disqualified as prescribed in the regulation. It'll help us formally document complaints and deficiencies, and it'll all be included in the procurement procedures manual. So similar to supplier performance, we also have a section included for contract management, and this will be a set of procedures to assist the service area in managing the contracts throughout the life cycle. Procurement Oversight Committee, the POC, is something that the CAO may choose to establish. We have included it in the policy, and it's important to note if the city chooses to not create the POC at this time, any reference to the POC would be associated with the CAO. The POC is meant to assist with the governance role while alleviating the level of reports required to go to council. Council will still obtain annual reporting as described on the next slide. Non-compliance with the policy may expose the city to risk of supplier complaints, reputational damage, bid disputes, and legal challenges. In order to stay accountable to the council, the following structure has been set up for reporting. As part of increasing the spending authorities, the requirement to include a list of procurements over 100,000 has been added to allow council to see a summary report of these purchases. Okay, everything, I know everyone's been waiting for this part, so. It is not new to the city to say the words best value, and best value does not always mean best price. There are other factors we consider. We are proud to say that the city, with the Finance Committee and Council support, sees social impact as an important value. As such, the city is incorporating social value into the procurement practices. The basic idea of social procurement is that you can use the purchases you make to generate a social value, buying more than the product or service. There is now a section within the policy, Section 7, Social Procurement. At the onset of this work, we had started out with our education with Mr. Berglund, who was recommended to us through Buy Social. At that time, Mr. Berglund provided the procurement team and key staff members with training on social procurement. Mr. Berglund has also provided us with some information on what others are doing in this space. We continued on our path to updating the entire policy, and with this, the need for external legal support was also important. Mr. Emanuele provided us with a review of our policy and assistance on key updates such as the delegation of authority and the POC, along with policy updates on social procurement. It was really important to the city to manage our risks, knowing that it is important for us to move into the social procurement area. Something that's been told to us quite often is this is still a very new area to Canada. And as such, we want to ensure that we continue to manage the risks and that the benefits outweigh it. So we are pleased to provide you with the 2 social protocols that we will be implementing once this policy is approved. Social value supplier roster is the first protocol. So this will allow organizations to be placed on the roster, and staff will be guided to refer to the roster and invite an organization to bid. It is very important to note that this roster, along with the next protocol you're going to see, is below the regulation thresholds for open competitive bid. This is very, very, very important. In order to weigh risk and reward, and any guidance received to date on this, our recommendation is to work under the trade treaty limits. Having this roster will help us understand what organizations are out there making a social impact, and to start the process of thinking about the ability the city has to make a positive change. The next social procurement protocol is for social value calculation in our procurement evaluations. The first part is that if one of the bidders is on the supplier roster, then they are eligible for the social value calculations. If the proposal is based on a bid price and the bid of the supplier on the supplier roster is within the specific tolerance as outlined in the protocol, then they will be awarded the contract. For calculations based on a bid score, there's a 2-part test. First, you would score all the bids, and the highest scored bid is used to compare price. The price compared to the organization from the roster, and if the price is within the tolerance set, they move on to the next stage, which is points. The organization on the roster can be awarded points, and then once you calculate their score after those points have been awarded, if they are higher than the highest scored bid, then they will win. If they are still not the highest score, they do not win. So I know that was a mouthful. Hopefully it was easy to understand, but this is really important. The first reason is around costs. So we want to control the cost based on social impacts. So that's why we were comparing the price. And then the second piece is having a consistent value allocation placed on social value and to not make it excessive, because there's other key attributes that calculate into a best value. And this is one of the important ones. When speaking to others who have implemented social procurement, one of the big takeaways we often heard was making sure that we engage with the vendor community. We will be conducting town halls, and the first one will be part of the rollout. We will also publish the information and provide information timely so that the vendors are aware. In addition, we will work with staff to understand the importance of social value and how we plan to incorporate it into our practices. And the hope is that the amount of social protocols will continue to grow. The procurement staff will be taking more courses that are scheduled in April that will better position us to know more about this area of procurement. We will continue to work with the legal consultants and general counsel office to understand the risks and case laws emerging. In addition to implementation of the social procurement, there are a lot of other really important changes to the policy for the city. These changes will be rolled out to city staff with the procurement procedures manual, and updates will continue to be made to that manual as we continue to grow. So at this time, the presentation is a receive and file, but the next version in June, I'm hoping for approval. And we really look forward to any feedback, questions, comments you may have. As CFO Fudge mentioned, Chris, manager of procurement, is here, as well as Orlando from legal. So I thank you for your time and happy to take any questions.
Thanks for the presentation. Presentations, questions from committee. Councillor Redmond, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Oh my gosh, I was so excited to see this report. So I think staff have thought about everything from risk mitigation to compliance monitoring to reducing red tape. It's just and creating an inclusive employment. But, you know, it just keeps such a high standard for the taxpayers. You know, they'll get a great value, but it mitigates risk to the taxpayer as well, while not only supporting fairness of wages, but also buying and supporting local, which of course just spurs the economy as well. So, and the other big thing that I wanted to just make note of is, like, we're empowering our staff, you know, and I think it's really, really important for us to do that. It also supports the recommendations of the Ernst & Young report, as well as supporting our strat plan. So it's great to see this moving in that direction. Only question that I have is, how often would you think that you would need to update your supplier list? Because I mean, of course, you're always having new suppliers coming in and out of the market.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. I envision the supplier roster is almost like a database that's going to continue to grow and evolve. So I expect it could change literally on a daily basis. The goal when we first roll it out is to... Sorry, I could hear an echo there for a second. The goal when we first roll it out is to reach as many people in the vendor community as possible so that they are aware of it. So with publishing it on our website, sending it when we send out, you know, requesting direct quotes and such. And then reaching out to staff once we do the education, reaching out to staff so that if they're aware of a supplier that we may not be aware of, to make sure that they're included on the roster as well. And then, of course, we'll be looking to kind of encourage, I like the part about the roster too, that we're encouraging our staff to reach out and review the roster if they're, because within our new policy, you're allowed to purchase under the low dollar threshold on your own, with getting 3 quotes if possible. So we're going to be encouraging them, look at the roster and see if there's anyone on that list that could provide what you're looking for, and make sure you invite them as well.
That's great. I mean, I'd love to see us make sure that, you know, that we're trying to kind of share business among suppliers too, if we can. So I think this is just great, and I appreciate all of your work.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hickey, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair. Well, Jody and team, I think there's a lot to celebrate here. You know, when I think about the overall changes to procurement policy, I think about the old management adage that goes, you know, a boss's job isn't to tell their employees how to do it, rather ask them how they can do their jobs better. And I think that's really what this embodies. It's about empowering our staff to take on more responsibility, to make decisions that are impactful for how they do their jobs. And then, you know, on the plus end, it's a huge step for continuous improvement, and certainly reduces the burden on our supply chain team. From a social procurement policy, I really think we did a good job at finding that area of best value out of these projects, and really finding a way to mesh how does the cost of the project balance with the social value of the project, which I think is really important. And I would suggest, really my question on it is, where we are in terms of other municipalities in whether it be our size or in our region that have taken steps like this. Have any other ones, Jody, offhand?
Yeah, so we do know Halifax has done quite a bit around social procurement, but they also have a social procurement or social charter. So here at the city, we really have taken the lead through procurement to start the ball rolling on social initiatives. So we're really proud of that. And just to your point on the price, I also love that it's a 2-point test, because it is really important to incorporate social value, but we still have to be very conscientious that this is taxpayers' dollars, and our ultimate goal is to provide a good level of service to them. And if we can somehow make a social impact in the community, that's all the better. But having that price test first is really important to make sure we're not paying too much for it.
Yeah, and it does well to address, you know, the criteria and the social procurement, you know, that has spin-offs for our community as well, right?
Exactly.
The products that our suppliers are using, the wages that those folks are paying their staff applies well to our community, right? We want people making more money in our community. We want wages to increase for folks in our community. That has positive spin-offs all over the place. So I think that's really important. I'm really glad that we're taking this leadership position in doing so, and I'm pretty proud of the team for adopting that, continuing to adopt that continuous improvement mentality. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hickey.
Thanks, Councillor Hickey. Your worship, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, Jody, that the whole thing is wonderful. It's so comprehensive, and the social, you know, procurement part is great. I love the fact that there's going to be that many less. I think of all of the hours and the time in the reports that end up coming to council, you know, so this will make a big change with a lot of that. I think that's really great. That's a big money saver too, because it saves the time of the employees to be doing other things. I mean, a lot of that stuff often goes into our consent agenda as well. So that's a great, you know, you have your key regulations all listed, so it's so secure what we're looking at as we designed it. And I'm just really proud of it as well, and proud of the team. And so this is another night where I say I've got the pom-poms out and waving them for you. I think it's great. So back to you and your team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, your worship. Yeah, I just see this as one more piece of corporate St. John modernizing our business. You know, whether we're modernizing streets, recreation, or our financial policies. You know, when you look at the procurement, what council was approving versus what modern cities empower their staff to approve, I've never known why I'm approving, you know, contracts on phones or computer systems or all sorts of things I have absolutely no expertise in. I think of the time that staff have to spend to prepare a contract to come to council, when that time really could probably be best used somewhere else rather than writing a report for us. So there are savings that we aren't seeing their financially or just in our staff being able to have more time to do more valuable things. And as in the presentation, council will still be approving 71% of the procurement, but it'll be the big things that we should be looking at, and we should be empowering and trusting our staff to do the daily work of fulfilling what's in the budget. So thank you very much for that. And I just pile on a little bit about how important and how impressed it is that our staff with our consultants were able to balance. I think it's so much easier for a small business if they want to do social procurement. If Councillor Radwin can hire whoever she wants to hire out at her restaurant, if she wants to help somebody out, she can help somebody out. If she thinks somebody needs a few more bucks in their pocket, she can do that. But as a city, we're responsible to so many pieces of legislation with regards to how we deal with the public's money. I very impressed with, and thank you so much to our legal department to help us navigate so much of that, so that we can get moving down the road, that as a city we're able to promote and support groups that need it as well. So thanks so much. There are no other questions on that. I think at this point in time, our recommendation is receive and file. Yes?
Yeah.
So I've got the mayor and Councillor Hickey on that, and everybody wanted to move it anyway. So I'll ask the question. Those in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? Of course not. And carried unanimously. Thanks very much, Director Forgy, for that.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to our next item, which is 6.2, the General Fund Long-Term Financial Plan Annual Update. CFO Fudge, to you.
Thank you very much. I've got a tough act to follow there with Ms. Forgy. We were before the Finance Committee, you'll recall, in July of 2022, or maybe you don't recall, but we were, to obtain your direction on financial principles and targets to incorporate into the base case of the 2032. So the next 10-year plan is from 2023 to 2032. General Fund Long-Term Financial Plan. So this next touch point and the purpose of today's presentation is to obtain further direction from the committee as it pertains to the stretch targets in the updated financial plan. So receiving your feedback will put staff in a position to move forward in producing the updated financial plan in time for recommendation to Common Council later this spring. And I trust everybody can see my slides up on the screen. Thank you. So I'm a policy wonk and a governance wonk, so I'm going to start with that. In 2019, Common Council transformed the financial management of the City of St. John with the 10-year long-term financial plan, along with a suite of best practice financial policies and a performance management framework and a reporting framework when it came to the plan. So to ensure fiscal responsibility remained embedded in the culture of the city for the long term, it was important to change the financial governance of the city, which was achieved through a policy called the Long-Term Financial Plan Policy. It's one of the policies that's been approved by Council. This policy confirmed Common Council's commitment to fiscal responsibility. And just to go into a little bit of detail on that particular policy, the policy further strengthened our governance by making the plan, and it's required in the policy, a true living document with requirements that the assumptions in the plan and the financial health scorecard of the plan be regularly updated, be regularly tracked and reported annually. And the commitment to fiscal responsibility was embedded in the governance through this policy. And this was an important element from the Finance Committee, with a provision that required 2/3 of the total membership of Council, or 8 votes, to make any changes to the best practice suites of financial policies unless otherwise recommended by my office. So it was a giant leap in terms of improving the governance and fiscal responsibility for the city. So this slide provides a contrast between the strategic and economic landscape in 2019 compared to the landscape in 2023, and it really shows why it's important to continuously update the long-term financial plan. So first and foremost, I guess the most important factor is we now actually have a 10-year strategic plan to inform our financial plan. And the primary goal of our financial plan is to fund council's 10-year strategic objectives in a fiscally responsible manner. So that's extremely important. In addition to many of the economic assumptions made in 2019, many are no longer reasonable based on the actual results we've seen over the last couple of years. And I'll just talk about a few of them. With tax base growth significantly higher than we anticipated in the plan in 2019, to mitigate the tax burden of the city and the community, Common Council has reduced the tax rate by 16.5 cents since the previous plan. And the reason for that is in the previous plan, we assumed, you'll recall, we were in a stagnated growth phase, we were in a restructuring phase, and we were being very conservative. And the growth assumptions in that plan was 1.5% growth on a base case and 3% growth, best case scenario on a stretch case being 3% growth. And what we achieved actually in 2023 was 8.76% growth. So quite a departure from the assumptions in the plan. However, for the next update, we are expecting an economic slowdown in 2023 caused by the Bank of Canada efforts to rein in inflation. So currently inflation is around 6% compared to our assumption in 2019 when we originally did the plan of inflation at 1.5%. We expect these actions by the Bank of Canada to settle to rein in inflation will have an impact on housing market, tax base, which is the city's primary driver of revenue. It'll place pressure on the city's wage and benefit packages as inflation's high, and employees wanting to keep up with the cost of inflation. That drives wage and benefit costs for the organization. And the BDO predicts that GDP growth in 2023 will slow down to 2% compared to 3.5% in 2022. Originally, a lot of words about recession, but now we're hearing more words about slowdown, which is I guess a better news story than what we were hearing a quarter ago. Interest rates in 2023 is forecasted to be 4.5% for the city, increasing the cost for the city to issue new debt. And of course, as I already mentioned, higher interest rates comes with an impact on housing prices. The other big one for us is the unconditional grant. The grant since our last long-term financial plan in 2023 has declined by 2.1%. And we have reason to believe that will continue to decline based on the formula that was approved by the province, down to $13.2 million by the end of the 5-year period when it's fully implemented. However, on a positive note, we are seeing a positive trend in population growth in recent years compared to 2019, from a period of decline to stagnant growth to now where we're seeing approximately 2.5% per year in population growth in the city, with a 10-year strategic plan goal of reaching a population of 85,000 in the next 10 years, or an average 2% per year. And we've seen a strong post-COVID job recovery market since the pandemic. So all these factors are complicated and complex, but they do play into what informs the assumptions of our long-term financial plan. And just quickly, you can see here the changes in population growth rates and housing prices from 2018 and 2022. Not to dive into the numbers here, it's just the whole point of this is that to demonstrate the volatility that can happen on a very short period of time and why you have to monitor these plans on a regular basis. So I mentioned we have received direction from the Finance Committee on the base case, and we are now seeking direction on the stretch case. We are asking for direction on the stretch case because what the stretch case does is it sets in place a plan for the city when the city exceeds its base case targets. So the base case focuses on providing a reliable level of service for the community. It prioritizes funding the strategic plan initiatives as the priority in the budget over the next 10 years. But the stretch case, if we're able to achieve it, allows for acceleration of the strategic plan, and it allows us an opportunity to exceed financial targets in the long-term financial plan in areas of debt, tax rate, reserve funding, and infrastructure deficit. So that's why we want to focus on two scenarios when we bring this to the Finance Committee. So this is the resolution from the Finance Committee back in July, recommending that the Finance Committee direct staff to continue with the current financial principles and targets embedded in the base case of the long-term financial plan. And at that July 2022 meeting, the Finance Committee endorsed also the principles, keeping with the principles of sustainability, flexibility, and vulnerability that underpin the financial plan and the strategies that are underneath each of those titles on the slide. So we will incorporate into the base case targets of the financial plan as directed by the Finance Committee, a 3% tax-based growth, keeping the 10-year base case tax rate target at $1.57, not significantly less than what we have now at $1.62, but deliberately to focus in the base case on delivering funding, reliable service delivery, and funding the objectives in the strat plan. We also will focus on ensuring operating budgets continue to be structurally balanced, and we'll focus on the same long-term targets we had in the previous plan of reducing infrastructure deficits and debt at 25% over the next 10 years, and increasing funding to pay-as-you-go and reserve funding as we set forth in the previous plan. And these are just some of the major commitments in the 10-year strategic plan that requires consideration in the long-term financial plan. Some of them are operating, some of them are capital, which is why the stretch case provides an opportunity to accelerate in many of these areas. So I just want to quickly go through the assumptions of the base case. So first, again, we're assuming in the base case tax-based growth of 3% per year on a residential basis and a non-residential basis. We're also assuming steady assessment-based growth for heavy industry at 2.5%. And we're also assuming the multiplier, and we're dealing with the best information we have right now. It's maxed out at 1.7 per legislation. So we're assuming for purposes of that right now, we continue to keep that one at 1.7, because again, the goal of that multiplier was never to increase taxes on the community or the non-residential community or the heavy industrial community. It was to enter the tax room that was vacated by the province so that the customer or the property owners in no worse position than they were before, but the tax room is transferred to the municipality. Priority to action 10-year strat plan. So the base case actually assumes the capital reserves to fund the recreational facility, which would be 15 million. Also assumes additional borrowing for 5 million for the recreational facility. It includes assumptions for continuous Birch Hill St. John Energy benefits being transferred to the city. It also assumes that we will receive benefits from the RSC structure with respect to cost reduction by sharing costs with the greater region. Tax rate will remain at $1.62 until 2027, 2028, when the special pension payments fall off, for which we would transition to $1.57. Cost of borrowing, we're assuming, will be 4.5% in 2024, and then decline to about 3.5% as inflation gets in check. We talked about the equalization funding, where that's going. That's in the assumptions. We're assuming inflation will go back to normal after a couple of years to about 2.25% and 3% in 2024. And I've already spoken about the population growth assumptions. So with these assumptions, you can see the plan in the base case is to keep the tax rate stable at $1.62, a reduction to $1.57 once the pension payments fall off, and to also apply 2 to 3 million annually that we save from the pension payments falling off into strategic initiatives into the strat plan to fund the strat plan. This also assumes the budgets themselves will be sculpted and prioritized in a way that that achieves the objectives of the strat plan that's been approved by Common Council. So the next few slides just illustrate the contrast of the base case in the current approved plan, I would call it the outdated plan that we're trying to update, to the base case in the proposed plan that we're bringing forward. So in the base case, the tax rate in the previous plan was to stay steady at $1.785 for 10 years. And now we know with the new reality, with the growth we actually achieved, we're going to see a base case scenario of $1.62 for 5 years, and then it fall to $1.57 for the other 5 years in the base case scenario. With respect to performance reporting, there are 4 data points on the next 2 slides. The first column, and these are base case targets. The first column is the key performance indicator when we first started the long-term financial plan in 2020. The second column is where we are right now in 2023. The third column is the 10-year target of the old plan. And the fourth column is the 10-year target in the updated base case plan that we propose. So you can see in all categories from debt per capita, debt service ratio, total debt as a percentage of operating budget, and long-term debt balance, significant improvements by following the long-term financial plan. Very significant improvements, and we continue to expect significant improvements. And that also relates to tax rate assessment growth, pay-as-you-go, and infrastructure deficit. So on the stretch case, the main difference in the stretch case scenario is the assumption that the city will meet an annual tax-based growth target of 5% per year, residential and non-residential, and achieve a tax-based growth in heavy industry of 3% per year. So based on the stretch case of 5%, if we were to apply all growth to the tax rate, so the very first column, or sorry, the first row you see on this slide, which is the one asterisk, what you see on that row is if we were to apply all growth of a 5% tax base increase to tax rate reduction, you would have a plan where you'd end up with a tax rate of $1.31.7 by 2032. That's what you see in the first row. However, that's not what we're recommending. Instead, we're recommending setting aside about 5 cents on the tax rate, which is approximately $5 to $6 million each year, dedicating that to accelerate the achievement of the city's strategic objectives, which would forecast a stretch case tax rate of $1.36.7 by the end of by year 10 or in 2032. This strategy allows the city to achieve a competitive tax rate at $1.36.7. And being competitive on tax rate, by the way, is also a strategic plan objective. It's a specific strategic plan objective in the plan, but allows us to be competitive. But it also unlocks funding if we can achieve this growth rate of about $41 million over that period of time to apply to meeting strategic plan initiatives. And again, that could be increasing capital, that could be increasing service delivery, but it would be analyzed to be used in the best way possible to achieve council's objectives. And then again, this is a comparison of the former long-term financial plan stretch case model, where we had it beginning at $1.775 as a tax rate in 2023, ending with $1.57 in 2032. And what we're proposing in the new stretch case model of currently sitting at $1.62 tax rate and going by the 10th year to $1.36.7. So the stretch case also allows the city to continue to improve the fiscal health of the city. And I won't go through all of these, but you can see significant improvements in debt per capita, debt service ratio, to get to the point where you only have a debt service ratio of 5% in your operating budget is tremendous. That means you're not spending money on debt, you're spending money on service delivery. And I'll just flip through these quickly. I will highlight the capital program in both scenarios are very consistent. The peak you see in the middle of the graph is the catalytic project for the multiplex. So we do have a consistent, steady capital program in this plan. And again, there are opportunities to increase the capital program depending on what we would want to do with the $41 million that we would achieve through a 5% tax-based growth with respect to the stretch case model. So this could increase depending on where council would like to allocate those funds if we achieve 5%. So we believe our assessment-based assumptions are reasonable in the plan. Here are some of the most recent tax-based growth figures, assessment-based growth figures for residential, non-residential, and industrial. We've considered economic factors. We also have reason to be cautious. You can see over the 10-year period, the last 2 years are an outlier. We know we're entering into some uncertain times with respect to a slowing of the economy. So I think the 3%, 5% scenarios are reasonable scenarios at this point. And again, it's a living plan, living document. If that we see information and data that changes our opinion, we update the plan. This is a scan of our residential tax rate competitiveness. So the city of St. John at $1.62. We're approximately 26%, and this is the residential tax rate, approximately 26% higher than Rothesay being the highest gap. And then we're also approximately 10% or 11% higher than the city of Moncton. And you can see the other figures on there in terms of tax rate competitiveness. With respect to non-residential tax rate, what you see here is the city's tax rate multiplied by the multiplier. So in Fredericton, if you're a non-residential customer or a business, you're looking at a municipal tax rate of $1.86. In Moncton, you're looking at $2.36. And in St. John, you're looking at $2.75. So we're 33% higher in tax rate non-residentially than Fredericton, 14% higher than Moncton. And you can see the growth rate we received in the non-residential sector in the final column, whereas St. John had a non-residential growth, tax-based growth rate of 3.26%. Moncton and Fredericton had non-residential tax-based growth of 10% and 9.55%. Not saying that's the sole reason why we see this difference in growth. It's certainly just one of the factors that may be a consideration. So the reality is, even though it's promising to see the tax rates reduced in the plan, the reality is the city, if we experience this type of tax-based growth, the reality is the other cities in New Brunswick are probably experiencing growth as well. And as we bring our tax rate down, there's a high probability other cities will bring their tax rate down. So we'll have to monitor over time how competitive we actually are. But I think it's a good initial target to set forth for the city. We showed this slide at our budget presentation. I'm not going to go through it again. It's really just if you were to invest in St. John in a residential development, and we use the example of, an apartment development in St. John, and you're investing $50 million, how much you would pay in property taxes over the next 20 years in St. John, and how much less you would pay in each of the communities on the slide. And we did the same thing here for the non-residential development. If you had the same $50 million investment, but savings you'd have over 20 years in the other two urban centers, Fredericton and Moncton. So in conclusion, funding the strategic plan is prioritized under both the base case and the stretch case model of the long-term financial plan. Financial health will continue to improve with lower debt and infrastructure deficit levels, as well as the ability to mitigate financial risk will be improved. And the strategic plan goal to be more competitive than tax rate in the stretch case, with the long-term tax rate target being reduced to $1.367 per $100 of assessed value. So with that, our recommendation really is strictly associated with the stretch case model. We've received your direction on the base case. The recommendation is to recommend that the Finance Committee approve the assumptions and financial targets presented this afternoon for the stretch case in the 2023-2032 General Fund Long-Term Financial Plan. If the Finance Committee does approve this, this will give staff direction to move forward with formalizing the formal plan, the formal reports, the materials you would have seen, which is a lot of work, by the way, that you would have seen back in 2019. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Questions from the committee?
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, that'll get her on the floor second, and have Councillor Hickey for a seconder, and Councillor Radwin to you.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to mention a couple of things about this report. I mean, I just love to see the debt balance going down, first of all. I think that was my most exciting part of the whole presentation. But, you know, I did want to mention a couple of things. Of course, when it comes to tax rate competitiveness, and, you know, these comparisons are really great, but I think it's really important that, you know, that the province really needs to be looking at this, you know, because really when it boils down to it, tells the story a little bit better as to why we need taxation fairness, why we need these tax assessments looked at in a fair way across the board, and that St. John, Moncton, and Fredericton are not the same cities, and we shouldn't be treated the exact same across the board. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that, you know, it's great to see the stretch case where we could possibly bring down our tax rates more, but like CFO Fudge said, chances are the other cities will be able to do the same thing because the province is just growing, which is fantastic. But once again, back to this tax fairness is extremely important. The other thing is I was just really happy to see us trying to excel the strat plan, but you know, with all this is said and done, I end up thinking as a whole, you know, we have the RSC changing, and I think that we need to keep our eye on the needle so closely because, you know, the province, it looks like the province is going to download some more responsibility onto the city, which could be perfectly fine. The only thing is that I have grave concerns that if they end up downloading some things onto the city and don't properly fund it in order to keep service levels at an acceptable, fair level, we won't be able to do that unless we're actually being downloaded the proper funds to go with it. So I just wanted to share that my thoughts with the committee, but I think this is great. It's wonderful that we're keeping our eye on the needle for everything in every area, whether it be revenues or debt, you know, and looking at the whole you know, the whole delivery from city perspective and how we're getting funds brought into the city too. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hickey, to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Not much to add beyond, you know, I think it's certainly worthy of Mayor Reardon's pom-poms to say, you know, looking at our current targets, we are 5 cents out, sitting at 162 from a 2030 target of 157. I mean, that is an incredible accomplishment and testament to the structure of our long-term financial plan, the growth targets that we were able to not only meet but exceed in the community. And I think there's a lot to celebrate there. And I think what it says too is moving forward on this plan, you know, there's two really important parts that we need to stay focused on, which I think is clear throughout here. You know, we need to make sure we are operating with strict financial prudence that's based in an evidence-based policy that we have here. And the second is we need to keep investing in our community so that it can keep growing. I think those are the two really important parts and that are represented here. We're making those big infrastructure investments, whether it be in our recreation facility or in the community as a whole, to make a community that's worthy of growth. You know, to Councillor Radwan's point, as we continue to advocate for tax fairness, you know, we can do all we can to get our tax rate down. At the end of the day, taking a small example, little old Titus's Bakery on Prince Edward Street had a higher per dollar tax increase than the 10-story office building that looms over top of it. So our assessment policy is broken, but our financial policy is working in the city, and it's disappointing that that's what we're being impacted by. But I'll leave it there and thank the team for their work.
Thanks, Councillor Hickey. Your worship, to you.
Thank you. I guess all I'll say is that I am excited about this. I mean, I was part of the team that was supportive of doing a long-term financial plan, you know, and that was new and exciting and interesting at the time. But the stretch case is really great. It's so forward thinking. And the other thing is, you know, we all do it in our own personal lives. So it's great to see it transitioning over for the city and to see that on paper. I'm very impressed and really grateful to the team. I find our finance team is always on the ball, always forward thinking, always looking at the trends. And this is a real demonstration of that on paper for me. So it's not on paper, but it's, you know, the next best thing. Anyways, so Kevin, to you and your team, thanks again. It is pom-pom worthy. You're right, Councillor. Thanks.
We're saving money without printing it on paper and just having it virtual.
Yeah, I love that too.
Councillor Norton.
I don't think I can say anything after that comment. It's a good way of looking at it. I guess one thing that it brings into focus is if the delta remains the same between the communities, even in the stretch scenario, it I guess it makes you consider how we continue to be a community of choice, because we're possibly no further ahead. So in that area, we're as competitive as we are right now. So if the delta remains the same between our outlying communities and us, it gives us something to consider about. Look, how do we continue to market or brand ourselves in those areas that makes us a community of choice? If those things continue to remain the same, whether that's focusing on our quality water, enhanced services, recreation, public safety, some of those things that are important to communities. Housing obviously is one of them, but it lets us know that we've got to be on our game to make sure that those things are there to entice or promote our community and give people a second thought about, look, if I'm gonna locate my family or move to a community, it's going to be where the buzz is happening. So I guess it's all I have, but great job. Thank you, CFO.
Thanks,
you.
Councillor.
If I could just respond to that comment, I think it's a perfect comment to really accentuate why the Finance Committee needs to look at this on an annual basis, and why the actual policy requires the Finance Committee to look at an annual basis, because we don't know what's going to transpire. We don't know what the other communities are going to do. We don't know what tax base we're going to achieve. So we need to look at this on a regular basis, and if we have to make adjustments to reflect current realities, we'll do that.
Thanks, CFO. Actually, I'll adjust my comments a little bit to piggyback on yours. Probably the most important part of our financial plan is the fact that we have to look at and potentially adjust our financial plan every year. Those assumptions, as we have seen over the last few years, the world is changing faster than it used to, and we can't predict, 2 more banks going under in the United States, predict a war somewhere that will cause supply chain issues, let alone a pandemic. So it is so important to look at things on an annual basis, update assumptions to keep us most relevant with our plan. This plan was born out of financial trouble and hardship. Incredibly important to follow a plan to help get yourself out of bad times. Probably even more important to follow a plan in good times so you don't set yourself up for those bad times, right? And important to remind ourselves that structural deficit really was born out of some really good years where we the city felt things are on a roll and they'll keep rolling. So we said, let's set up some programs and do these things, and things didn't keep rolling, and we weren't prepared for when times are lean. An example would be the update on what we're going to do with capital expenditures in this inflationary time, and use of a little bit of reserve funds because we plan for it. We have to plan for those things. So really good that we continue to follow it, and that we are updating, and that the big add-on now is we have that strategic plan that we didn't have before. So we need to be the gatekeepers in the finance world so that we make sure that there is funding to continue on with that strategic plan. And part of the strategic plan is to keep updating the strategic plan, right? Just smart planning. So that is a good thing. When I first saw this, just because I've been such an advocate on tax rate for so long, that is my go-to instinct. That maybe in the base case, maybe the stretch isn't enough of a stretch when we're looking at our tax rate. And then again, something that we didn't have 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, certainly didn't have 3 years ago,
3 years ago in the city of St. John, we had a lot of empty apartments. And people had pretty good choice, and apartment rates were just starting to see a bit of a nudge. And 3 years later, there are no apartments to be had unless you were looking at paying a premium. My economics and business profs from UNBSJ way back in the day, if we looked at this as a straight, and I've often referred to our tax rate as our price, and there's more to it, but it's part of our price. Do we really right now want to be growing? We don't have anywhere to put people. So I guess looking at our tax rate right now, I've reconciled and said to myself, you know what? If we need to hold the line on the tax rate right now while we get housing in order, okay, because the problem with wanting to, as Councillor Norton said, I love being proud of my community and being the community of choice. But if we have more people choosing to live here, economics says that just drives the price of houses up. It drives the price of apartments up if we don't have more supply. Which is why I'm good that we're investing in our strategic plan, which attacks the housing crisis. So I guess all of that being said, I'm certainly in favor of what we've got down here, and a bit of a cautionary tale that we need to keep an eye on those other effects, because we don't want to have a financial plan that's driving more people to come here than we are able to handle right now. I hope that makes sense. But I think it is set up well, because trusting our partners over in the Strategic Planning Committee to make sure that housing is such a priority that we are getting more residents built so we can continue to be that community of choice and have people here. But the other piece, I will just tag on to Councillor Norton's comments. That's not to say I don't think we should invest, because we need to be rewarding the people who are living here now, right? You know, people have chosen to live in St. John, and people who have been here their entire lives. We need to be investing. We need to be rewarding the people who live here now in their choice to be in St. John. So I think what we've got in front of us strikes that good balance, and just so smart that, you know, we're talking about what we looked at last July 22, and now we're in March of 23 and looking at our plan again, and our plan shows up in front of us in some way, shape, or form in front of every meeting, which it should. Sorry to take up so much airtime, but I think, you know, the financial plan is the foundation of what we're talking about and talk about in this committee. So it's just so important to talk about. Thanks. Those would be my comments. And with all of that, I think we had it moved and seconded, so I'll take the vote. On the recommendation, all in favor? Oh, CAO, I'll get you in here in a second. Carried. Mr. McGovern, you flashed on my screen. Does that mean you wanted to have a comment?
No, I was just going to add on, Chairman, to your comments around, you know, really growth working in tandem with finance. And, you know, as we attend the growth committee and we see the number of builds on the horizon and the number of units, it is important that those come to fruition so that we can attract the population and continue to grow and follow Plan SJ and get more dense and realize, you know, better value for ratepayers as we make best use of services and become more efficient in our service offerings through that intensification and density of population. So they are working in tandem, and it's nice to see that we have shovels that will be in the ground in a number of developments to attract more growth to our great city.
Yep. I love cranes in the sky and detours around construction. Makes me happy.
Thank you.
Thanks, CAO. So that's it for 6.2. Moving on to 6.3, the general fund budget proposed timeline. CFO Fudge, I think you are introducing it and sending it off to Mr. Levine, I think. Go ahead.
I certainly am. I cannot believe we're talking budget timeline already, but it's going to be coming in a flash. And I do want to just set the stage for what you're going to see in Mr. Levine's presentation on timeline. So we take feedback very seriously when we receive feedback. In the last budget round, we did hear feedback. We heard the desire from council. I think there was some desire to have a shorter gap between where the finance committee had their hands on the budget information to when council gets their hands on the information. We're very open and transparent in the finance committee, but I think last year it went almost 90 days before it got to council, because we do a receive and file, then we do an approval at the finance committee. And there was a real desire by the other members of council to really get involved in this. So what you're seeing in this is, one, you're going to see a shorter gap between it going through the finance committee, subject to there's no significant issues once the finance committee approves it, to go into council, so you can have the greater participation and feedback. Second, we heard loud and clear that there was a desire to have some public engagement on the budget, and we would look at the budget as a representation of your plans. And your plans, many of your plans have had extensive public engagement already within those processes. So we don't think we need to the same extent the public engagement, because we are representing the plans that have gone through that formal, robust engagement process. But we are going to recommend leveraging in this timeline a module called Shape Your Budget that's available with Shape Your City, to allow the residents and the community to offer feedback on the budget, so we can see what we receive back, see if it's striking the right tone, see if we're seeing any concerns with respect to engaged citizens who want to get involved and understand the budget. And then third, we do plan to introduce, with the coordination with our CIO, who developed this format in the past, a service-based budget. We've heard at council the fact that it's really difficult to understand budgets because you can't really understand their numbers. They're just costs, they're numbers. But to really understand the budget, you need to understand the service levels, the performance, what you're receiving for the money. And we're going to try to provide a modified formatted service-based budget for 2023. For 2024's budget, working with the CIO, that strikes the right balance of something that can be digested, but also very relevant to the services that council is concerned about, so you can have a better understanding of what's in that budget. So with that, I'll be quiet. I'll turn it over to Mr. Levine to walk you through the timeline.
Thank you, CFO Fudge. And to members of the Finance Committee, I'm very happy to present the proposed budget timeline for the 2024 General Fund operating budget. Many of the dates, particularly around our Finance Committee that you'll see tonight, have yet to be confirmed, but I think this will just give you a good overview of our timelines. And as CFO Fudge just spoke to, these are the key inputs into our budget, the Shape Your Budget, bringing back the service-based budget, but also as well as our 10-year strat plan, long-term financial plan, and the various plans such as Plan SJ, Play SJ, and Move SJ. So May 24th, to the Finance Committee, we would like to review the Shape Your Budget platform. We would be looking for some feedback, recommendations, and approval. And based on that, we would hope to roll that out June, July, and keep it open for submissions for a determined time. June 28th, to the Finance Committee, we are looking to bring back, which is something we haven't done in the last couple of budget cycles, the presentations from our service areas, and get into the discussion around their work plans, their budget submissions, and we would also be looking to include some of our larger service or ABCs, such as Transit Commission and our Police Commission. July 31st, we anticipate regional service commissions to approve the regional facilities budgets. So September 13th, we would hope to be back to the Finance Committee to review the results of Shape Your Budget and discuss the potential impacts of results of this. October 12th, to the Finance Committee, we would like to present the draft operating budget, which hopefully, based on the last 2 years, we will have our actual tax assessments, and this would be a receive and file. And then turning around October 25th, back to the Finance Committee for a final draft of our operating budget for approval and recommend to the Common Council for receive and file. And then October 30th to Common Council, the 2024 operating budget presentation, and that would be a receive and file. And then if all goes well, November 14th, Common Council 2024 budget for approval. So the intent of this presentation was really to provide the Finance Committee with an overview of the budget process and the estimated timelines for the 2024 general fund operating budget and the various steps to be taken. We will provide an update to the Finance Committee on the utility funds operating budget at a later time. And the recommendation is the Finance Committee receive and file this presentation and direct any other questions to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Questions for staff from committee?
I'll move receive and file.
Looks like our chairman is frozen.
I'll second it.
We will give it a minute to see if he signs off and signs back in.
Do we have a deputy? Your worship?
We have quorum with 3.
I could go to, if we'd like, I can move to Councillor Radwan, but I can't work anything.
Seconded
never
by
mind,
my
I'm back.
crappy city computer. That's kind of where I left off, followed up by my semi-crappy city phone that wouldn't join the Teams meeting. I was working on device number 3 when my computer came back. So when I
Councillor
last
Radwan's
left,
up first.
but did it? I caught you, your worship, moving the receive and file. I missed the seconder. Councillor Hickey seconded. Okay,
And
Thanks for
Councillor
stepping
Radwan's
in.
up first.
awesome. Back to our program. Councillor Radwin.
Thank you, Chair. It's good we're not spending that much on technology. So, but I do have a couple of questions, Chair. So I'm wondering how residents will be able to engage in your Shape the Budget platform. That's my first question.
I'll take a crack at this, and then maybe Mr. Levine can augment. We're in the exploratory stage of the Shape Your Budget platform. We're working with the Director of Communications, Lisa Casey, who rolled out the Shape Your City platform. So they're very versed in that platform. So we're just in early stages of understanding that, and as we understand the mechanics of it, we will bring that information back to the Finance Committee.
Okay, that's great. And I just, just food for thought. I know a lot of the time this sort of feedback happens online, which is very convenient for a lot of people. However, I'd like to make sure that, if we can make sure that people are able to write something, by hand and drop it off maybe to customer service or something, however you guys figured that it would work, would be probably great. And I did want to just kind of make a little comment as to what I'm kind of hoping to see from the commissions. I'm hoping to see a more detailed budget. This is something that I've wanted to see for 9 years when I sat out in the gallery that I didn't get to see as a citizen. And I think these questions come up a lot of, exactly where the money is going. Sometimes you'll see a budget sheet of, 5 items. That doesn't give you a whole lot of detail into really where the money is going. So anyway, I would love to see more detail in their budget. I don't know how much, how much control we have over that, but I think that it would really give a better picture and maybe give a better understanding to residents as to, where the money is really flowing in those departments. Just food for thought.
Yeah, I'll just add comment to that. First and foremost, the Finance Committee can receive as much detail as they want to satisfy yourself to approve a budget. So with respect to our budget process, we bring it at a service-based level. We bring it at a category level. We can get right into the weeds in terms of each service if it was desired to or not. With respect to ABCs, let's use Police Commission, for example. Even though on the budget it's a single number, which is an operating grant to the commission, to satisfy yourselves of approving that number, you could ask for the commission to come forward and bring as much detail as you want to understand how that funding will be leveraged and whether it's that budget amount is something that you want to approve. So the finance committee has that ability to request information. You're not approving the commission's budget. That's the commission's responsibility, but you're approving the envelope of funds from the city of St. John, which allows the commission to prepare their budget. So there is a very important distinction there.
Thanks, CFO. You good with that, Councillor Redmond? Awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I don't think we have to get into like extreme detail. That's up to the commission, but I think it's been very, very broad in the past, and I know it's brought, I don't know how many questions in my mind when I was a resident in the gallery. So I'd like to be able to tie up some of those questions for people.
Yeah, no, I think the two pieces that are going to help that are in this plan with that, one is the service-based budgeting. I've had some experience with that. So people will see, for X dollars you get this. If you choose to put in X dollars, then this is the effect. That will be good for service levels. And the other piece is that June 28th, give or take, date where the service areas will be making presentations in front of us, which will allow us to ask some probing questions if we feel necessary. So I think that will help. Councillor, Your Worship, Mayor Reardon, over to you.
Thank you so much. I like it all. I like all the time frames, bringing it both to finance and to council. I do like the Shape Your City component because we have plans like you said, Commissioner, that the public's had an opportunity to shape those plans going forward, and our team has been working on those plans. So it will be interesting to see how the Shape Your City kind of aligns with what we've already done. I mean, it's a lot. It would be, I don't want to say, listen, let's change the whole thing. I mean, that's a waste of time and money. We've put good plans together with all of that public input. So it just will be interesting to see how those two align. So I do like to have that small component of Shape Your City. I'm happy to see that in there. Will be really interesting. So thanks again. I love that perspective. Just getting a little bit more, and I like the timelines as well. I think they're all great. So appreciate all the work that's been involved in this and rejigging it for us so that we have what we want, what we've asked for last time. Always appreciate that you guys accommodate us and do it so well, and you do it so punctually. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Your Worship. Something I really appreciate across the board with city staff is city staff listens when we're talking to each other. They're listening and taking notes. And it doesn't always require a motion of council to move. If they hear us talking about something and there's a consensus, it's almost like Siri. It just kind of shows up. They're listening all the time. Anyway, thanks. Councillor Hickey, to you.
Thanks, Chair. Just kind of working off what the Mayor Reardon's comment. Question for staff. How exactly will the Shape Your City work to impact the budget? Like, how will those results be assessed in order to actually offer some insight on the budget?
You are on mute, CFO Fletch.
My apologies. I didn't know if Mr. Levine wanted to chime in here or not. I think, obviously we need to look at what that feedback is. We need to look at the sample size we're receiving. It depends on how much, what quantity of feedback we receive and whether it's something that we can rely upon in terms of that feedback. And also, I think there's some touch points back to understand, first and foremost, we want to see whether it aligns with plans. And if we're getting feedback that's not even close to aligning with strategic plans, which the budget's based on, then I think it constitutes a conversation, if it's information we can rely upon, about whether we're striking the right balance in our strategic plan. So I think it'll be iterative, it'll evolve. I don't have a definitive answer yet because I don't know what we're going to receive.
Sure. And I guess, Kevin, what I was really getting at, like, is that information going to be presented to committee at some point and allow for some discussion from there?
Absolutely, yes. This is information we'll compile and bring back to the Finance Committee for consideration.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillors. Thanks, CFO Fudge. Yeah, looking at the timelines, I do like the fact that we're talking about budget now, right? We shouldn't be rushing these things. We should make sure we're talking about how we're doing the budget, so that when we do the budget, it's proper. And the one piece, just for committee's knowledge, CFO Fudge and I have already had some conversation around that June 28th, give or take date when presentations are made. We chose to do virtual meetings. They're very efficient. They allow us to get work done and really help people to attend. Really focus on that, hearing the feedback from council about having a more public component and opportunity. I think June 28th is a day when we can be a little less efficient, if that makes sense. Plan for a longer meeting, plan for it to be in council chambers, so that we're actually there with the people who are making presentations. Council chambers gives an opportunity for any public who want to come hear the presentation live. We appreciate all of you who are watching us on YouTube, but I think there's a real opportunity. June 28th, actually, FYI, is the first day of summer for teachers. So I've been talking with Councillor Norton about, and I will touch base with the rest of the committee as well, to see if we can plan some time during the day when we don't have to rush out. We can make that day a real priority so that we can have those conversations that Councillor Radwin alluded to. So I think that's a key touch point. And then that September 13th date, it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of feedback we get out of Shape Your Budget. A few years ago when we did the online public, I can't remember what it was called, but it was for the public simulator. Yes, thank you. The budget simulator. The conversation that started when people were trying to balance our budget at the time was fantastic conversation, when everyone was actually, you were stuck either really raising our tax rate significantly or cutting something that nobody wanted to cut. So I think it's a real good opportunity to have those conversations. And, at depending on what the feedback is, Councillor Hickey, as we discussed on September 13th, I foresee it could be, something that we have to throw to the growth committee or strategic planning ad hoc committee for their feedback too, because as CFO Fudge said, if it's not really in line with kind of the strategic plan and growth plans that we are looking to fund, it could be a broader conversation beyond the finance committee. But I think that's important. The budget is ours to lead, and I think getting that feedback is important. And then it's basically a 32 or 33 day timeline from the draft operating budget. But it doesn't seem rushed to me, because so much conversation will have happened before that hopefully by the time October rolls around, we will be fine tuning across the way. So I think this sets up well to cover a lot of the touch points on process that came out in the last budget discussion. And so the recommendation is that we receive and file and direct any questions to staff. Did we have that motion? Yeah, that's when my computer went away. Can we throw a computer in the budget for next year? Just saying. All right. All in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Carried. Item 6.4, the 2022 unaudited general fund and utility fund results. Mr. Levine, I see you on the screen. I guess Mr. Fudge will get started. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick. Before Mr. Levine starts the presentation, these are unaudited results. We still are going through the auditing process. So Mr. Levine will touch upon that. You'll also see one major adjustment. We're considering this to be on budget with respect to what you'll see Mr. Levine present in details. You'll see one major adjustment, which is something that we cannot budget for, and it's to do with actuarial review of liabilities, and it's an accounting entry that's creating the biggest part of the surplus. So Craig will explain that to the committee. And just for the record, I think we've got the best IT department in New Brunswick and Canada, and I'll put our infrastructure up toward against any other IT team anywhere, any place. So with that, turn it over to Mr. Levine.
Thank you, CFO Fudge. To the committee, and I'm pleased to give you an overview of our 2022 unaudited year-end fund-based results. As CFO Fudge just alluded to, we are well underway with our audit, and we anticipate having the audited consolidated financial statements presented to the Finance Committee in May. If you recall, the Finance Committee was provided with year-to-date results as well as year-end projections in November. Many of the variants discussed at that time will remain the same as you see throughout this presentation. You'll see the wages and benefits surpluses that we have due to vacancies, and as well as the length of the vacancies, as well as various expense pressures such as fuel, insurance, vehicle parts, and snow removals. So as we get through the service areas, I will probably go through this quite quickly as the results are very similar to what we projected. So staff brought, as I said, year-end estimates to the Finance Committee on November 22nd based on October 31st, 2022 results. And what this slide is just showing what we predicted as of October 31st to be our year-end results. So we predicted just a little slight surplus of $4,700. Our actual unaudited results are just shy of $2.46 million. And you'll see the difference between the projections. So the summary of the difference between projections versus our actual results. So revenue was about 1.56 million higher than we projected. Again, accommodation levy came in slightly higher. We received more short-term interest than we anticipated. Transfers from the reserves were more than we had in our projections. And again, there's just some small differences over several revenue lines. As CFO Fudge alluded to, we had a major favorable adjustment from the actuarials of just over $2.46 million, as well as some other variances related to transfers to reserves and other charges and fiscal charges, such as our interest and pension being slightly higher than we had in our original year-end forecast. So here's an overall snapshot of our general fund unaudited financial results. So we have a surplus we're projecting to be just over $2.45 million. Revenue is better than budget by just over $3.8 million, and total expenditures are over budget by just over $1.36 million. And we wanted to put this disclaimer in, as again, CFO Fudge talked about, the actuarial benefit review resulted in an adjustment of just $2.46 million. This was a positive adjustment. However, again, this is a non-cash judgment. The city has no control or influence over this adjustment. The actuarial can swing significantly year over year due to a variety of factors, and interest rates being one of those. For this reason, the operating reserve actually includes a benefit fluctuation reserve to address this when the adjustment is unfavorable. So in summary, if we actually take out the actuarial adjustment and just focus on our operational results, we have an operational deficit of just over $8,600 for the year end, and that's compared to the $4,700 surplus that we projected we would end up. Again, this is just a slide by service areas that shows the breakdown of our $3.81 million variance in their revenues. And again, I won't go through all these in detail, but property taxes, this was due to the LNG, the net surplus. And again, as part of our 2023 budget, LNG is no longer broken out and it's included in the base tax assessment. So we're no longer going to have to wait and see. Growth community development, just over 1 million. Again, positive variance due to increase in building permits as well as accommodation levy. And Public Works and Transportation, a very large variance of over $2 million, and the majority of that being in the increase in recovery of our parking, meter revenue, traffic violations, but as well as we received very late in the year some additional funding under Department of Transportation, our municipally designated highway program, so that is increasing our revenue. This slide is just a high-level breakdown of service area on expenditures, and again, I will just quickly flip through each of the service area. So you can see growth of community development, an overall deficit of just over $557,000. Very similar to what we brought back in November. Goods and services are over budget by 763, which is mainly due to the accommodation levy that is transferred to Envision SJ, which was just over 800,000 more than we budgeted. But again, this is offset by the additional levy revenues that we bring in, which is really great news that we're over budget, because it means that the businesses are recovering, hotels are recovering. Great news overall. And then you can see there's just a couple other variances that we speak to. Public Works and Transportation, you can just see they have an unfavorable variance of just over $2 million for the year. And again, very similar to what we spoke about, goods and services, snow control, sidewalk, we had increased fuel costs, equipment parts, road salt was 160% over budget. Street services, if you're looking at the details, you're going to see a huge overage there. And again, that's with the additional work we did on the highway program, which again, as I just spoke to, we have the revenues that come in to offset that. The transit subsidy is over budget. And again, that's the significant cost of fuel that was outside their hedging program, as well as some major increases in their insurance costs. Public safety, just a very minor surplus of just over 75,000. And a very similar story for both fire and police, and that was around fuel costs. They were over budget for both services. Fire had some additional costs around the POMAC study that wasn't budgeted for, as well as from a police perspective, there was some increases in their legal fees and insurance. Utilities and infrastructure, just over 725,000 negative variance. And again, a lot of it due to increased costs in the carpenter shop supplies, engineering, general building maintenance, insurance deductible. And again, with the stock room, a familiar story with just general increases for our goods that we're receiving. Strategic services, which I'm pleased to say that finance is a part of, so we have the best overall positive variance, which I would expect. Wages and benefits, goods and services, so there was just some positive variances within our IT department on telephone costs and other services, as well as in corporate planning, had a positive variance due to a project that was actually funded under corporate services instead of corporate planning. Corporate services, positive overall variance of just over $542,000. And again, very similar to what we brought back in November, city manager's office had some positive variance due to one-time special projects that were not utilized for various reasons. But overall, all the services had small year-to-date surpluses. Other charges, here's a snapshot of where we are. So it's just over 768,000 positive variance. Again, special pension payments were slightly over budget due to some retroactive payments that were made as part of settlement of some collective agreements. Transfers to operating reserves were over budget due to some funding we received from St. John Energy, again, which is the revenues there to offset this expenditure, and as well as the amount of the interest earned on reserves that had to be transferred to the actual reserve balances. Fiscal charges were slightly over budget due to the higher cost of our fall debenture. And again, we talk about that actuarial gain that resulted in a $2.47 million favorable adjustment. Utility year-end results. So we brought in November, we anticipated to be in about $152,000 positive variance. We actually ended up around 266. So the difference was about 113 with what we were projecting at that time. The difference in revenue of 500,000, we still had 2 major billings left for our industrial customers that came in much higher than we anticipated. Interest revenue and leach aid was higher than we anticipated at that time, as well as our internal charges between the utility and general fund were about 200,000 less than we estimated. An expenditure, the $390,000 difference was really just a majority of timing on receiving our goods and completing some of our projects, such as our industrial meter replacement program. So this is an overall snapshot of the utility year-end results, and as I said earlier, $266,000 surplus for the year. So overall revenue year-end variance analysis just shy of, just a little over $1 million positive variances. As we spoke about in November, our meter billings continued to increase due to COVID recovery, and commercial consumption was up, resulting in just over 748,000 positive variance. Industrial revenues were up slightly, and as well as other revenues are better than projected. And that was a combination of our interest revenue, property transfers, and other charges such as leach aid revenues. Overall year-end results for expenditures, just over 795,000. Goods and services being 931, but if you can recall, the largest driver is actually the $750,000 that we transferred to our potable capital reserves that was approved at the November Finance Committee, and this was really due to the positive variance we were getting in our potable meter revenues, and the remaining is just minor variances across a lot of the service levels. So in conclusion, the general operating results was only a deficit of $8,600 on an operating budget of just over $164 million. And that's compared to the year-end operating results that we brought forward, which would have been just over 4,000. The overall general surplus of $2.457 million, which again is a result of the one-time non-cash adjustment due to the actuarial benefit review. And despite the cost overruns in our winter programs, our increases in fuel, insurance, and many other goods in 2022, the risks and the cost overruns were managed within our overall budget envelope. So in conclusion as well, the surplus will be brought into as the first line item is in our 2024 operating budget. As you can recall from the October 3rd, 2022 meeting of Common Council, there's a resolution to allocate any general operating surpluses over this council's term into a recreation facility capital reserve to fund the Cattle Lake Comprehensive Recreation Facility. And with that, I recommend that the Finance Committee receive and file this presentation and direct any questions to staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Levine. Questions for staff from committee?
I'll move, receive, and file.
And seconded by Councillor Hickey. Questions or comments? Councillor Hickey, go ahead.
All I'd say, Chair, is there was a time when it was a little bit more difficult to be on this committee, but sticking to a plan and working a plan that you've had in place for a long time is proving itself. And to be even with those actuarials in, Craig, to be within 1% of your budget projection is really impressive. I mean, I won't point to other governments, but budgets are a place to align your revenue and your expenditures. And if you're not doing that, then you either have too much of one or too much of the other. So to be within 1% of that is really impressive.
Thank you, Councillor Hickey. Your worship, or Councillor Edwin, any comments or questions? No, we're good? Okay. More shout outs for our staff who led us to this process. For anybody who's watching, not only does our long-term financial plan have a plan that makes us review the long-term financial plan, our long-term financial plan also has a policy that says we have to monitor the budget all the way through the year. So in doing so, and our budget monitoring processes and our fantastic finance staff, but it's also spread throughout the organization because everyone in the organization is required to monitor their budgets and make sure that they're accurately reporting back. So the fact that take out that actuarial adjustment and it's point percent on target. Wow. Just shout out, for those other levels of government, if you want to rent out our staff, we'd happily charge you for it. A great premium. They're fantastic. Don't let them hire them away. The no news on the end of the budget is great news. So thank you all for that. So we had the receive and file. All in favor, raise your hand. Contrary minded? Carried. Checking in, CFO Fudge. I have scrolled to the bottom of our agenda.
That concludes the meeting.
So just before the adjournment, 2 hours ago, we had a presentation on updating our procurement policy, which included the City of St. John moving into social procurement with support of our legal department. Thank you very much. And external consultants. So that's very exciting. But also within that strategic procurement policy is just getting us into the modern age so that staff don't have to write reports for council on items that have already been approved in the budget, and they can carry through. Our long-term financial plan, we talked about it a lot tonight, in updating our general fund budget proposed timelines, having taken in feedback from the last budget process. We're listening. Staff is always listening. Thank you very much. And the great news that there's really not a lot of news, that we looked like our unaudited general fund and utility fund financial results are on target. So all good news from another St. John Finance Committee meeting led by our fantastic staff. So with all of that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Your Worship, Councillor Radwin, we are adjourned. Have a great night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.